That's not a comic book. Now that's a comic book.
Now for trade talk. So we have another volume of Zorro from Matt Wagner. And this one it's titled Tales of the Fox, and that's an absolutely deserved title. The plot kind of advances in this one slightly, but not at all issue to issue, kind of. We're set up with what's happening at the beginning, and then we get a bunch of issues where little tiny details of the plot continue to drive what's happening, and then at the end we're given where we're going to get back to the I don't want to call it the actual story, but we're going to get back to the meat of storytelling. But that's not to say that this isn't good. I don't want to say it's skippable, but if you don't like that, I'm trying to remember the name of the Batman episode. Do you remember that episode, Batman the Animated Series, where it's all these different kids telling stories about Batman? Let's see if we can find that real quick. Batman episode where kids tell stories about Batman. Maybe the internet will be magical. Legends of the Dark Knight. Ah, yay. Go internet. Legends of the Dark Knight was that one where all the kids are telling, like, oh no, it's like this, and so we get, like, kind of the animated version of the Frank Miller Batman, and we get kind of, like, 60s style Batman that's slightly reminiscent of Adam West, and we get all those different, versions of Batman. Magical water appears. There wasn't an edit or anything. So that's really what we're getting here. And this book has completely admitted that it is borrowing from Batman because Batman borrowed from Zorro. And that's fine. Again, I think it's maybe going a little too far with that, especially in the first volume and the whole, League of Shadows kind of reminiscent thing. That, I think, is over the line, but it's okay. Because it's like this much of the book. And not even, like, if it were to, like, actually get the book, it'd be, like, like, that much of the book. So anyway, that's not in here at all. What's going on in this one is we have the lead general, if you will, the person who is at the topmost in charge of the California province. What's his name? We get actually a pretty good preamble here, so I'm going to go ahead and read it out. In 1805, the Spanish crown withdrew its support of the seated governor of Alta California, Jose Joaquin de Arreaga. These names. And installed as his successor a military leader with considerable influence among the noble homes in Madrid, General Rafael Luis Mansado. Some say this appointment was as a reward for faithful service to the Spanish monarch Charles IV, while others claimed far more salacious reasons. Mansado ruled the northernmost of Spain's New World colonies with an iron hand. The tax burdens were increased on both caballero and peon alike, and discipline was uncompromising. In short order, he had remade the face of Alta California to suit his own needs and his fortunes. The landed gentry were for the most part obliging of this new hierarchy and its harsher regulations. In truth, they had little choice. This almost feels like reading the original Zorro book, Curse of Capistrano. On the battlefield, General Massando had proven himself the worthy strategist in many campaigns against Britain, against Prussia. He held an uncanny ability for uncovering his enemies' weaknesses, as well as those of his allies. And my book's coming apart, and luckily Amazon's going to be sending me a new one. So that's the preamble, and the issue kind of closes out with it, but what we're given is this party with all these rich people, and this kind of sets the tone for what the rest of this book and this arc is, which is Mansado gaining information on Zorro from people talking about him. No, it doesn't even close out the issue with that. So, yeah, my book, like, completely fell apart. Look at that. That shouldn't happen. So yes, I'm excited to be getting a new one of these because it's really good. So so that's where the issue begins, is with him getting the wealthy together in California to tell him what they know of Zorro. And then throughout the book, we have Mansado talking to different people in different levels of the social hierarchy of California, or listening to different people. At one point, a bunch of workers are together around a campfire at night because that's the only time that they have any free time. Otherwise, their Spanish masters demand them to be doing something, kind of like having a minimum wage job. Zing! And so, like, he poses as a peon and listens into their stories. And everyone's talking about Zorro and what they think he is, or what he's doing, and so on and so forth. And so there's, like, a zombie Zorro, and there's Zorro who's a native that's, wears the head of a fox and robs the wealthy. And then there's Zorro that's like a native that has gone on a spirit quest and has turned the spirit of the fox into something evil so that he can gain material things from it. And there's all these different interpretations of what it is Zorro's doing, and then there's people that have actually seen Zorro and are curious of he's curious of their accounts. There's a homeowner or a hacienda owner, if you will, that is not pleased, that is incredibly strict and incredibly harsh on his servants, so that any mistake is severely punished, and people are mistreated horribly. And Zorro shows up and cuts a Z across his face as a warning. That's Zorro's type of warning. Batman ain't got shit on Zorro. Cuts a Z straight across his face that if he doesn't start treating people incredibly well, Zorro will be back. And the guy doesn't even question it. Like, it's a complete 180 in these 2 6-month periods of how his staff is treated. No one is meant to do any work that they're not able to, and whatever they're able to turn in is automatically good enough for this guy. So it's just a night and day difference that Zorro inspires in this guy. And so the general is told about that, and it's just all these different things compile on top of each other to go with this building legend of what Zorro is, and so it's the legend continues, the legend lives on. The California Devil, they call him, and stuff. And so just this story just keeps building and driving and moving forward. And so at the end, we have the narration return, the very end of the book. In this latest foe, General Massando had encountered an opponent who fought by no known rules of engagement. One who seemed immune to fear and whose mask persona made confrontation elusive at best. This problem would require more study and further strategy. A war has never been won via a single battle. And so that's really all we get, is we just get this general researching his enemy through all these different means. Like, he talks to some soldiers that lost Zorro in the mountains on a pursuit, and so he learns some of Zorro's tactics there, and how clever the guy is, and he's called considerable times that they say that the name Fox is quite appropriate, because he is just as wily. And he's very disappointed in his subordinates because he thinks that they're very bad at their jobs and that they're not doing enough, but the more he hears, the more he's willing to buy the legend himself as well. Something I like about this is that the villain of each story arc is becoming... How should I put this? The villain of each story is significantly lower than the villain of the next story. So there's a natural progression of threat to Zorro. Because, like, the villain of the first story was this captain of the Los Angeles Pueblo who was a really harsh... Captain Gonzalez, who was a really harsh, really abusive guy, and Zorro teaches him his lesson, and really kicks his ass, and frees prisoners, and that was the end of the first story arc. And then the next story arc, he's back, and he wants revenge and stuff, but he's a subordinate to the higher villain, who is the God, what was his name? The guy who got totally outclassed with the candle thing that I told you about last time. Links in the description if you want to see my thoughts on that. Volume 2, Clashing Blades of Matt Wagner's Zorro run. So you had Gonzalez, who is a subordinate to that guy, and you have this guy who's a subordinate, obviously, to General Masando. So you have a clear ranked hierarchy of villain, and Zorro is climbing his way up this chain and becoming a greater and greater threat as time goes on. And like, everyone considers him a joke at first, and that's one of his greatest strengths. But this guy actually does research into his opponent, and he's obviously of the understanding by this point that Zorro is not a trifle, Zorro is not a joke, Zorro is a legitimate threat to Spain's dominance over California. And by extension, his own. Reverse those two. Zorro's a legitimate threat to his own domination of California and by extension Spain. So he not only has a personal motivation to stop Zorro, he has a motivation dictated to him by the state. So it's really interesting. It's great politics and stuff, and that's all the meat of the story. So this volume isn't skippable, but it certainly isn't like a key part of everything else. This volume is an anthology series of different tales of Zorro, with a character's narrative through it in the villain for the next volume, I'm assuming. Or maybe the villain from now on. Because, like, everything is driving in this. Everything is moving toward his motivations and his ability to understand Zorro. That being said, the stories themselves, the anthologies themselves, are awesome. Just these, it really is like Legends of the Dark Knight, that episode of Batman the Animated Series where people are just telling stories about Zorro. So if you want to get an idea of what Zorro means to different people, this might be a good thing to jump onto. because then you could always go back and read the other 2 volumes as well if this catches your interest. Then you can read what the continuing story is. But yeah, the stories are great. So here is something I couldn't help but tweet about, and I'm really excited to show you guys. Here is Zorro riding a literal tornado. Wrong hand, Ian. And using a snake as a whip. In one guy's story. And then on the next page, he has a sword made of lightning. That's just cool. That is just objectively awesome. And then let's a little more forward where I was talking about the spirit of the fox being used incorrectly for personal gain. We get kind of that man-batter, that vampire Batman thing where we get, Zorro is a man, a skinwalker who can turn into a gigantic fox, werefox or whatever. And so we get that take on him. And so there's all this fear and this misunderstanding of what Zorro is, but he's inspiring all these people to talk about him. And then we get he's just some rich guy that does this for fun. He doesn't really care about us. He's just looking to get his thrills because he's bored with his, extravagant lifestyle. And so, cough, cough, gay blade, cough, cough. And then, but predominantly there's a narrative that everyone, that has these negative tales is told immediately, no, that's not true. There's elements of truth to everything everyone's been saying, but ultimately he is still a good man. That's what's, in these group tellings, that's what's continuing to get pushed forward, is ultimately he is still a good person. He knows of the old ways, or he is a gentleman. Zorro is more than the sum of his parts. Zorro is a combination of all these different things, which is really fascinating. Let me just read that one, since it's actually really short. There's this woman telling this story. It was sunset before we decided to return, only to discover that her eldest Rico had gone missing. Rico, where are you? Rico! Desperately, I climbed higher into the hills, for such terrain has always called out to young boys. Suddenly, I heard him crying. At last, I found him. A wild puma had him cornered against a precipice. I screamed, hoping to draw its attention, but to no avail. And then a miracle. As some have mentioned, he appeared out of nowhere, so fast I never even heard his mount's approach. He never hesitated for an instant. Junata, you are right. Junata, you are right. He has some knowledge of the old ways. He yelled to the puma, taunting it not in Spanish, but in the Tanagava tongue. He told the cat to flee before raven and hawk came to pluck out its eyes. He called the beast egg stealer and dung eater until finally the puma turned tail and ran. To Rico he whispered gentle words in Spanish, called him brave and muy macho. Santos, you are right as well. His bow was courtly, and his steed was indeed magnificent and well fitted. Surely this was a caballero. But this was no god, nor spirit, nor rogue. This was merely a man, a brave and capable man. But Miguel, you were right. He was, most definitely, a hero. It's so simple. It's Zorro saving a kid from a cat, like a big cat, but still, it's Zorro saving a child, and that's what he is. He's all these things. He is a rich, affluent gentleman, but he's also aware, at least, or a member of the tribes, of the downtrodden. He understands them in a fundamental way that no one else could. So that's really, really great stuff, and it just makes the book so much fun to read and so good to get into. And so the stories are so fresh. It's like Okay, every story is Zorro saves the day. No, it is not! There's things where they talk about Zorro being a monster and being some kind of, like, zombie spirit or whatever that haunts the West. So it's all over the place with the kind of storytelling you get. And it's exaggerated, or it's understated, or it's mockingly, it's humorous, it's fun, it's Zorro, it's cool. Read it, you fucks. I'm sorry, read it, people. Though it is really great stuff. I'm really happy that I'll be getting a good version of the book that's not, missing pieces like that, or losing pieces, I suppose. So, everyone, I hope you enjoyed. I hope I've convinced you to go out and buy this book, because it is fucking cool. And this certainly is something that it's not an origin, which is really helpful to get into, because origins always have kind of a slump you have to get over. And it's not super complicated plot, because it's pretty much your basic setup of, okay, Zorro's doing his thing, and there's a stinger at the end, and the plot of the overarching plot of the book is still a part of this, but there's plenty to. It's not overly complicated. It doesn't prevent you from getting into it, because the plot is pretty simple. The new bad guy is being introduced, and there's some more stuff going on with Diego and the girl of the one house. So it's not complicated, and there's still references to other things that are going on. What is her name? Lolo? No, that's her nickname. Whatever. Whatever. There's stuff going on with that, but it's so minor to the rest of the stuff that the driving story is like the overarching story is not at all a big part of this book. It certainly helps for those of us that are reading the entire thing, but it's not at all necessary to know to get into. It's really basic Zorro stuff. He's trying to woo a woman, he's dealing with a secret identity, and we're having a villain introduced. That's it. That's all of the baggage, if you will, from the fact that this is the third volume in an ongoing series of, 3 and 2 is 5, Ian, of 5 volumes. So there's certainly nothing that keeps you from getting into this. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't like to really start with an origin, you want to know like what the tone and style of writing is going to be outside of that, this is great, because it's all just these short stories that tell like tales of Zorro that are contradicting, that are flat out wrong, and that's fun. So yeah, you should really pick this up. Tales of the Fox. Great volume. Try to get a version that's cover isn't falling off of the pages.
That's not a comic book. Now that's a comic book.